Thank you, Member. Member from Fredericton Grand Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to bring some questions forward today, to thank the Minister, of course, for being here and his staff. And I guess relevant to the bill, I just want to make a couple comments. You know, early on, the Minister was talking about, you know, when the pandemic first started, and we were seeing reports of it, the whole globe really was watching, as he said, what was happening in northern Italy and in China and different pockets where healthcare systems were overwhelmed, and it was startling to say the least. And I remember when that first happened, and I did support you know, the state of emergency. I supported the initial lockdown. Again, just to get the province prepared, the healthcare system, government, everybody on the same page to how we deal with this pandemic. And I was very pleased with the Premier's move to create the all-party cabinet committee. And it was, in a sense, an extension of the minority government that we saw working so well in the 2 years previous to that. So I've always applauded the Premier for that. And it was an honor, it continues to be an honor to be part of that committee. And I don't think it's any secret that there's been times, you know, I may have had a different opinion than maybe the consensus of the committee, and I know other party leaders have expressed some dissent from time to time, but overall, it was important, and it was important to get different viewpoints on that committee, different angles, and again, I commend the Premier for striking that committee and seeing it move to where it is today. And I also agree with the Minister that when you talk about an emergency order, those things are not to be taken lightly in any sense. Because one thing we value in this country, one thing that our forefathers fought and died for, is the ability to be free. You know, to travel, to move, to not be restrained or restricted or have barriers to free travel within your own country as a Canadian citizen. Those are critical, you know, to a free functioning democracy and society that we cherish. So the emergency order was not to be taken lightly. I still don't believe it's to be taken lightly. I think every time that order is to be renewed, we have to really look at it. Government has to look at it and say, are we still in a state of emergency? And that question has to be asked every time the signature is at the bottom of that mandatory order. I was pleased to see that government is moving towards a reopening phase. It's something that I pushed for quite strongly over the last probably 6 to 8 weeks. As we see vaccination rates come up, as we see that our health care system is not getting overwhelmed. I think right now we're sitting at about 6 people in hospital. And again, we have to step back and say, you know, at what point does this no longer constitute a state of emergency? Because the objective has never been, nor should it ever be, this concept that we're going to eradicate COVID. COVID, as far as I understand by the data that I've seen, is here to stay. It's going to be like the flu season. We're going to have to deal with this year after year. That's why I believe in vaccines and their efficacy. My arm's a little sore today because I just got mine yesterday. But I'm pleased to be part of that. And I encourage other people to do that. Although it should be an option. I've always spoke quite strongly against forced vaccinations. It should be optional. This is people's health, and they should have that freedom to choose for themselves what they want to do. So, I guess building that, I'll get back to the bill, which is somewhat relevant to what we're discussing today. When we talk about the emergency order, and we talk about this bill in particular, I guess I just have a couple questions, and I know a lot of questions have been raised by the official opposition, by the Green Party member, questions that I had on the list here that I'll check off. And Minister, through you, Chair, I know you've said this dozens of times. I'm not one for redundancy, but in this case, I think it's important that I hear it again, so it's strikingly clear to anybody that's listening or watching. And I'll ask this question. Does this bill in any way extend measures within the emergency order after the emergency order is canceled?
Absolutely not. When the emergency order expires, it's void. It does not exist, and we are returning to the law of the land that was in effect before the order, with the exception of the protective items which are in this bill, which I believe to be necessary and legitimate. And as the member opposite well knows, this bill went through COVID cabinet. It went through cabinet and was read first and second in the legislature. And those questions were asked. I don't believe that you're being redundant. I believe that you're being thorough. And I believe on the floor of the legislature in committee that that was a very legitimate question that needs to be asked in the public domain. Not in cabinet, not in COVID cabinet, not in a meeting, but here on the floor of the legislature, the public record. When this order expires, it's over, and everything in it has no force and effect whatsoever.
Thank you, Minister. You know, it's not very often that you ask a question and you get a very direct answer. That's what I've always appreciated about the minister. You know, you usually get a direct answer, and this couldn't be any more direct. So for anybody watching or anybody listening, that's important, that that point is made very clear, which it was, that, you know, the emergency order, when it ends, it truly ends, and that this bill does not give any extension to any measures. But I do have a second question to that. And I know this bill is intended to provide some sense of immunity, whether it's to businesses or government, in any litigation brought forward based on the emergency order when it was in effect. And I also understand the bill allows for public safety to have a continuation of any type of prosecution or investigation as it relates to the emergency order. And again, both those things I understand. The last thing you would want is people en masse, you know, creating lawsuits towards government, and as a taxpayer, you know, we've got to protect the taxpayer, or private entities, you know, on speculations of where COVID was caught and what was done and not done. But I guess the only small concern I have with this is, does this bill present any barriers to litigation over certain measures or enforcement that maybe wasn't done in good faith? That maybe there were certain instances where things weren't done appropriately as the emergency order would state. So just again for clarity, does this bill present any barriers to litigation over certain measures or enforcement that maybe was not done in good faith?
The bill does not protect against gross negligence. Someone is grossly negligent, this bill does not protect them. That is negligence is the lack of meeting of duty of care, whereas gross negligence is so egregious behavior. Now, those are defined legal terms. Negligence and gross negligence, it's a question of fact to be ruled upon. This statute does not protect against gross negligence. Secondly, since this started, we have never had a complaint about someone acting in bad faith. Now, there are people that have been prickly because they've been charged. You know, I was charged with not wearing a mask, and I was, blah, blah, blah. There's that. There's always going to be that. But nobody ever said that they were charging me improperly when I had done nothing and I was being shaken down and everything else like that. So there's not been any incidents of that, and the Act does not protect gross negligence, nor should it.
Thank you, Minister. I appreciate that. And in line with that, I guess my second question, there's a federal, I don't know if you'd call it a lawsuit or what the term is legally, but there's a federal court hearing that's going up the first week of June on the federal hotel isolation program, on whether it's constitutional. They had requested an injunction. The court denied the injunction. However, the court did see merit and credibility to the initial claim of a violation of their rights. And again, I know we've said that over and over with the emergency order. But there is a court proceeding going on federally, and I believe the hearing is going to be the first week of July on the federal mandatory isolation hotel program. And I know New Brunswick has taken a similar model with the hotel isolation facility here, and my only concern is where we have the federal court hearing on it, would this bill bar any sort of legal hearings on that program here in the province as it's currently being in the courts federally?
Well, that kind of puts the Attorney General into a little bit of a sticky position, in that for me to comment on a legal action commenced in federal court or in federal rules probably wouldn't be helpful, and it's not appropriate that a Attorney General talk off the cuff and give opinions about lawsuits and things of that nature. So I believe that this is necessary, and I believe it is restrictive. I don't believe it goes too far. But at the end of the day, if someone commences an action, that is their right to do so in a free society, and that's why we have courts and judges. And but I believe that this legislation is constitutional, it is defendable, and it is necessary, but it wouldn't be appropriate for me to opine on possible combinations and machinations of things that may manifest themselves in the future. The Attorney General should not do that.
No, Minister, and through the chair, I certainly respect that. I know that's a tough position to be in to try to answer, but I guess my point of view is I'm simply trying to understand how broad this bill is in that regard, because again, I do think that there has to be avenues by which people, even in an emergency order, can be able to test the limits of government in an emergency order. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think not only does that allow people to have those court proceedings on constitutional rights, but it can also tell future governments, when the next issue comes forward, how far they can or can't go. And that's why I think the federal court proceeding on the federal hotel isolation program is going to be pretty telling, however that case unfolds, one way or the other. And so I guess, Minister, if I could, to try to give you a little bit of leadway here without being too specific, take the hotel isolation program out of the picture, just in general. Can you assure us that there's still the opportunity for people to find avenues of legal proceedings to be able to determine, I guess at the end of the day, it's for courts to determine how far emergency measures can go and what their limitations may be. And I understand, again, the intent of the bill, and I don't, you know, I support it, I'm not against it, but I just don't want it to be so encompassing that that people can't challenge some measures, I guess, in court, just as a broad spectrum, not necessarily personal, but broadly in their constitutional rights. And even if the minister can provide some broad general clarity around that would be great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.